weeks ago, I talked about things that make Jesus angry. And then last week, you had a really good discussion around that. We've had discussions on our WhatsApp page around that. And I absolutely love that we've been able to do that we've been able to discuss stuff, learn from each other, disagree with each other. And because there's a lot of churches where disagreeing with someone who's preaching would not be tolerated. And I love that. To me, that's just what a Christ-centered community that wants to grow in God's image and grow in our understanding of him should look like. And as I said, this morning is also something that I'd love your feedback on. My aim this morning is to make you think. Perhaps I might be going to be a little bit deliberately controversial because that makes people think and that makes people question things. But as I said, just because I'm here doesn't mean you have to agree with me. I also don't pretend to have all the answers. As I said, I'm not actually going to answer the question that I'm going to pose to you. The other sort of brief text I want to give is I'm going to use the word anger quite carefully throughout this because I think we've learned anger can mean different things to different people. To some people, if you're angry, you're out of control and you've lost it. To some people, it just means you're a little bit irked, shall we say. A little bit irked. Irked. It's a good word, isn't it? Irked. Annoyed, yes. So, yeah. But I think what we can agree from what we've been reading is that Jesus was, I'm going to use the word aggrieved, by people who were taking advantage of other people. And we can see that in the story of the money traders in the temple that we've been looking at, when the money traders were taking advantage of the worshippers. So basically, all the Jewish people had to come to the temple in Jerusalem to give a sacrifice. And they would come with all these different coinage and all these different currencies, but the temple authorities would only accept money in a certain currency. So then these money changers in the temple would allow you to change the currency of wherever you came from into whatever it was that the temple authorities wanted, but they take a nice cut out of it for you. They would also, because Jewish law said that you had to make a sacrifice, they would very conveniently have all the animals that you need to sacrifice right here for you at this very nice inflated price. What Jesus was angry about was people taking advantage of people who were worshipping it, wanting to worship him. So I just want to read that passage again, because in case not everybody's been here for the last few weeks, and just to remind us as well. So John chapter 2, it's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is this passage, but we're going to read the John version because it has the most detail in it. So John chapter 2, verse 13. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins and the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will..." Let me find it. Now, obviously, the computer stopped working now. Next page, please. There we go. Interesting, I've got a different translation. The translation I've got written on my notes is, Jesus goes, "Passion for God's house will consume me." So, anyway, we know that Jesus is a God of love. And we know that most of the time, Jesus chose to sit down with people and eat and spend time with people that he disagreed with, or that the society would choose as outcasts. He, most of the time, chose to value, well, all the time, he chose to value people and chose to sit down at the table and eat with them. But from this verse here, we also know that at least once, Jesus chose to not sit at the table with the people, but he chose to flip the tables. So the question for this morning is, when should we sit at tables and when should we flip the tables? And I think for me, it comes down to injustice and what Jesus thought about injustice. So, to start, let's work out what injustice is. Because, again, that's something that means different things to different people. Injustice is simply the opposite of justice. Okay? So then we need to define justice, don't we? So, God's justice is a really misunderstood concept, and loads of people, they would think of it as meaning rewarding the good and punishing the wicked. And if that's where you are, I would say, well, get out the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and get in the tree of life. Because the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is all about that judgment and saying what's right and wrong. But the tree of life goes beyond that. And that's not how Jesus operated. He never once made it a condition of his time or his love that people had to be good or people have had to say sorry before he would sit down and eat with them. He sat down and ate at tables with people regardless. Linking to what Ken was saying earlier in that wonderful song, isn't it? From reading about Jesus, I believe that God's justice is something really simple. It's seeing people as God sees them. It's seeing others as being made in the image of God. It's seeing others as our equals, whatever sins we think they might have committed. So, injustice then is where, for whatever reason, people end up being treated differently. I know many of you, like I do, get upset when we see people being taken advantage of by those in power. We see politicians blaming the migrant, the foreign worker, the LGBTQ community, for problems caused by the rich elite. We see the president, I am going to go here, we see the president of the USA abusing his power to degrade the president of Ukraine. We see the powerful blaming and taking advantage of the weak to increase their own wealth and power. And that has sadly always been a part of society, and it will always be a part of society until God's kingdom is restored. If Donald Trump treated Zelensky as an equal when they went into the White House, there would have been a very different outcome on Thursday. This taking advantage of the weak is something that was there in Jesus' time. It's happening now, as I said. And it's this the idea of othering people. Have you heard of this concept? The idea of othering people. So it's spotting a community of people who seem a little bit different. Maybe it's their skin colour, maybe it's sexual orientation, whatever. A community of people who seem different and then blaming them, scapegoating them for things that they have absolutely no power over. Have people seen the musical Wicked or seen the film version of it? If you haven't, I hugely recommend you watch the film version of it, or even better, live on stage. That was based on a book, and when this book was written, it was actually quite a good political commentary on othering, and at the time it was looking at Irish migrants to America who were being blamed for things, and it's always there's another group who then comes in and then they now take the blame. But in the musical or the film, there's the talking animals who are being persecuted. One of the professors at the university gets hauled away because he's an animal and he's different and he's not a human. And towards the end, I'm going to say hero of the film, Elphaba, confronts the Wizard of Oz, who turns out not to be the hero over this. And he makes this comment: the best way to bring folks together is to give them a real good enemy. I'm actually just going to watch a quick clip of that. Connor, would you just turn the unlabelled iPad on for me? I think I turned it off, and hopefully this will work.
Oh, scouts.
Oh, hello.
What about scouts? Because they're going to be flying around Oz reporting back on any seditious animal activity.
Seditious animal activity? What does that mean?
Elf, I'm sure the wizard has a good reason.
It's you. You're behind all of this. You're the reason why people are turning against the animals.
We're doing this to keep people safe. All of us will benefit.
And you've known all along.
You will benefit too, dearie. You must trust
Don't!
When I first got here, there was discord. And back where I come from, everybody knows that the best way to bring folks together is to give them a real good enemy.
Why wouldn't you just make them yourself?
I really love that quote. Well, I love what I don't love what it's saying, but I love its reflection on society. So I guess when we're faced with injustice in our lives, and we will be all the time, how should we respond? What is the loving, I guess, Christian response? When should we sit at tables with people? When should we flip some tables? It could be a government or a president pushing an agenda. It could be that we overhear a comment, that we see something in the workplace, in the shop, in the pub. It could even be somebody using a Bible in God's name to push an agenda which is not from God. Perhaps there's times that we ourselves are the victims of this injustice. One thing we could do is nothing. But I don't feel this is what Jesus would have done or did. I love this verse from Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. As Christians, together, we are the church. We are God's body. We are the vehicle through which God wants to make a difference to the world. But it can be very hard for us to know when to get involved, and if so, how to get involved. Well, it's always a good idea to look at what Jesus did. And most of the time, I can say almost all of the time, Jesus got involved by sitting at a table with the oppressed. The first and very simple way we can respond to injustice is to show someone that we value them, that we think that they have worth, to treat them like they are God's child. Why? Because they are God's child. And that's why we do the cafe and all the other outreach that we do. To show everyone that they are loved and they are valued, full stop, no buts and no conditions, just as they are. And that is, I think, the most powerful way that we can stand with the oppressed, is just by showing them that they are loved. And that's what Jesus did, isn't it? That's what Jesus did to Zacchaeus, to the woman at the well, to the children the disciples wouldn't let near him, to the man with the withered hand that he healed on the Sabbath, to the woman with the issue with blood, to the lepers and the outcasts. He saw them as equals and he treated them as such, often much to the disgust of society. But that's all very well, but do sometimes tables need to be flipped to make a point as well? Well, Jesus clearly thought so because he did it. I was reading an article. There you go. Picture of Jesus sat at a table, in case you weren't sure what that looked like. So I was reading an article about this, and it asked this question. Do we sit at tables Jesus would have flipped? There is a time to sit at the table with those that we disagree with. But as I said, there's also a time to flip the table. But I think perhaps a more pertinent question, because I think a lot of the time, actually churches do more flipping than they should. A more pertinent question might be, do we flip tables that Jesus would have sat at? Because I think the church over its history is generally more guilty of flipping than sitting, if you're following the metaphor. One of the many tables that Jesus chose to sit at was that of Levi. And we read about that in Mark chapter 2. Let's look at that together. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at a tax collector's booth. They're always tax collectors, aren't they? Follow me, Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and the tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." He sat at the table with the outcasts and the unclean. It's very clear. There's so many examples of Jesus doing that. And that's what Jesus did, and therefore it's what we should do. Stand in a solidarity with the oppressed and the marginalised. So at the back there we say that love is the only mission. Well, for me, sitting down and valuing and eating with these people is the main part of that mission. Let's read Matthew 25, starting at verse 34. Jesus speaking. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." But then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you did for me." I find that an incredibly powerful verse. We should treat those who are in need, we should treat those who are being oppressed, we should treat the victims of injustice the same way that we would treat Jesus. And that's the challenge. If we would invite Jesus to sit at our table, and I hope that we should invite the homeless and the outcast to sit at our table. And that's, again, what we do on a Thursday, isn't it? But we can always do more. So Jesus sat at lots and lots of tables. He sat at many more tables than he flipped. But he did flip the tables of those who used religion to take advantage of others. And that's the key. He flipped the tables of people who used religion to take advantage of others. Another bit of scripture, Luke chapter 15, the parable of the great banquet. This is Jesus speaking. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, that's not Jesus speaking, "Blessed is the one who will eat the feast in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I need to go and see a man about a dog.' Another said, 'I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.'" I love these biblical excuses. "I bought a new field, I need to try out my new oxen. I might try that next time my boss says I've not done a job at work." Still another said, "I've just got married, so I can't come." That one's still valid, isn't it? The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." "Sir," the servant said, "what you have ordered has been done, but there is still room." Then the master told his servant, "Go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet." What this parable tells us is that the original guests were invited to sit at the table with Jesus, but they refused. From everything I know about Jesus, If he thought that the money changers in the temple would get up and leave by being asked nicely, he would have done that. Jesus was not a violent man. He allowed himself to be executed rather than be violent. But what those money changers in the temple had done was not just refuse a seat at the table, they turned the table itself into a place of injustice and exploitation. And that was why Jesus felt it needed to be flipped. But even then, Jesus didn't hurt anyone. There is no record that anyone was injured in the flipping of the tables and accompanying the whipping. And I feel like that's an important detail that would have been included if it had happened. It's only actually one of the Gospels which mentions the whip at all. And the others is just turning over tables. So what was Jesus' example of responding to injustice? Well, as I've said, he sat at the table. He valued the oppressed. He showed them that they are worthy. He showed them that they are loved. He did this practically by helping them and emotionally by giving his time. Not being too busy or too pompous to spend time with those that others would look down on. Not having an ego. But he also flipped the table when needed, when those causing me injustice wouldn't listen. Now, flipping tables doesn't have to be taken literally, though. For me, it's challenging those who want to cause injustice. It's the other side of the coin to sitting with those who are the victims of it. It's challenging those who are causing the injustice. It's to make your point, sometimes forcibly, but with love. Now, this wasn't an issue for Jesus, but I find that the internet can be a real cesspit of injustice. Social media in particular. And I always, when I come across things online which are promoting injustice and intolerance, my tactic is to try and sit at the table where possible and to show everyone that I value them, but also where I see people causing injustice, to speak out and do some proverbial flipping. So, for example, this post came on the Keith the Cougar's website a few weeks ago. It's just them saying, our home game on Sunday will be dedicated to LGBT plus History Month. So stay tuned to our socials tomorrow and we reveal our annual Pride kit. Excellent. Wouldn't have thought that should cause any problems or any arguments. Oh. It received loads of really horrible comments. Some people are then getting angry with the people who were with the trolls and arguing back, and well, I can understand why they were. And there's actually some really nasty arguments were taking place. So I was thinking, right, I'm reading these comments. I could ignore it. I could step into the argument, and I was very tempted to say some interesting things back to some of these people. Or I can take a step back, and I can get involved, and I can try to bring love. So I said this. All the negative comments on here are the reason why Pride and History Month are needed. No one is going to become gay because of a rugby team, which is what some of the people in the comments were saying. Obviously, that's not how it works, is it? The fact that we can find it comical is brilliant, but I think some people genuinely think that's how the world works. But realising it's okay just to be yourself and not having to live with a lie to fit in with society is empowering and has such a positive effect on mental health. The statistics are about LGBTQ plus young people are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide as their peers. That's not okay. And it's the responsibility of all of society to try and address that. Right? Interesting, no one tried to argue with me about that. And it got lots of really good comments in response. I think responses like that do both things, don't they? We sit at the table and show solidarity with the people who are being oppressed, but it also flips the table on the oppressor. I'm not saying violently, it's out of love, but we can do both. Another person who I feel did this is a hero of mine, Nelson Mandela. He saw the injustice of apartheid South Africa, where black people were treated horrifically and unequally. What did he do? Well, he certainly sat at the table with the oppressed. He was one of the oppressed. But he also flipped some tables. There was some violence. He went to jail for sabotage and things like that. And I'm not judging. I'm not going to say whether his actions are right or wrong. But he made his point. And then later, through peaceful democratic means, he ended the evil and unjust apartheid system. And then worked with people like Desmond Tutu to all the reconciliation that went after that. So we go back to this question. When should we sit and when should we flip? Well, I think sitting should be our default position. Valuing all and sitting with them in solidarity. But we should also be prepared to rock the boat when needed and stand up to the oppressor. Change only happens when brave people stand up and make it count. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, Emmeline Pankhurst, and perhaps Volodymyr Zelensky. I don't have an easy answer to the question, when should we flip and when should we sit? Because it's something each of us have to decide, having listened to the Spirit and evaluated what's going on for ourselves. If in doubt, my advice will be to sit now. But I think it's also important, don't mistake sitting at the table for doing nothing. Because spending time with people, listening, discussing and valuing is really powerful. And it's often actually harder than getting angry and making a scene. Sit down with people you disagree with, to be brave enough to step out and sit with people who are being oppressed, no matter what other people are going to say to you. I think that's braver than getting angry and causing a fuss. A phrase that I've heard people say is, I'd rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude. I'll say it again. I'd rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude. But when we do decide it's necessary to rock the boat and flip the tables a bit, there are just some rules I think that we can follow, that follow the example that Jesus set. First one was everything we do it out of love. We don't do it because we're out of control, because out of rage. We do it in a controlled manner, well thought out manner out of love. We make sure no one gets hurt, physically and ideally emotionally. We make sure that what we're doing is about making the world better, not just about satisfying our anger or our egos. We treat everyone with compassion, not looking down on others. I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, a quote attributed to Volodymyr Zelensky, and he said something like, I don't want my picture as president to be on the walls of buildings and in homes, as some presidents seem to like. Have a picture of your family, have a picture of the ones you love on the wall, and make decisions based on the outcomes of them. He's following those rules, isn't he? Treating everyone with compassion, not looking down on others, and doing it out of love rather than satisfying our own egos. So I've kind of answered the question. I've certainly made you think about things. Because there's a lot of injustice in our world. But it's the duty of the church, I believe, to try and address appropriately. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add or say, or maybe you want to go away and think about it and let me know later? Or